Lando Norris won the British Grand Prix, making it back-to-back wins for the first time in his Formula 1 career. And looking at the last 5 races, apart from Canada and that collision with Piastri, he has won 3 of them, including Monaco and Silverstone, which undoubtedly are the 2 most special races on the calendar for him, and he also finished second in the other race as well. Norris has really regained some momentum at the midway point of the season, and he has also closed the gap in the championship to just 8 points. Oscar Piastri, despite leading for the majority of the race, however, was the big talking point after he received a 10-second penalty for driving erratically under the safety car, which in the end not only decided the race, but also cost him the Grand Prix win. The beginning of the race was very chaotic to manage with multiple VSCs, but the leaders managed to maintain their starting positions. Piastri wasted no time as Max was clearly struggling in the Red Bull, overtaking him on lap 8 to take the race lead. As the rain intensified, Norris also followed suit when Max made a mistake on lap 11 and went wide to make it a McLaren 1-2. However, during the first round of pit stops, Lando was jumped by Max after a really slow stop of 5.5 seconds by McLaren, putting Max back up into P2. Right before the safety car was brought out due to undrivable weather on lap 14, Piastri's pace was absolutely ridiculous. In 6 laps, Piastri had built up a gap ahead of Max of over 14 seconds before the safety car was brought out and eroded that advantage. It didn't take long for the next safety car to make an appearance, because during that restart, Hadjar crashed into the back of Antonelli, and it was during this next safety car that the outcome of the race would be decided. As the safety car lights were turned off, indicating that it was driving back into the pits, Piastri decided to start slowing down the pack and to start making a gap to the safety car, braking hard on the hangar straights, which behind him caught Max Verstappen out, who had to take avoiding action as to not hit Piastri. It's also worth noting that Max then immediately spun on the restart, handing P2 over to Lando Norris, and that meant that Lando didn't have to lose any time overtaking Max again and would have absolutely no one between him and Piastri with a penalty to come. The stewards handed Oscar a 10-second time penalty for braking erratically on the straight, which resulted in Max having to take avoiding action. That would then decide the race win after the last round of pit stops, in which Piastri, after serving his 10-second time penalty and then after Lando also made his final pit stop, meant that Oscar came out behind Lando. Now, a lot of comparisons have been made to the Russell-Verstappen incident in Canada, and whilst there was no mention of the speed difference in the Russell incident by the FIA, the ruling did mention that Russell applied 30 psi worth of brake pressure, which they said wasn't excessive, whilst Piastri applied 52.9 psi. On top of that, the major deciding factor was the speed difference, as Piastri, in trying to slow the pack down and let the safety car escape, decelerated from 218 km an hour to just 52 km an hour. Although it's not specifically mentioned, there is no doubt that the conditions also played a massive part, especially in Max having to take avoiding action. Because the safety car had only just started to drive away, there's no way that Oscar was using that moment to restart the race, because otherwise he would just catch the safety car straight away. He was obviously braking to both get heat into his tyres and also to bunch the pack up, as is the norm for a restart. The conditions, however, meant that Max couldn't see Piastri as well as, say, Russell for example in Canada, and so as Piastri was braking more erratically than usual in the eyes of the stewards, Max reacted later than he would in the dry and hence had to take avoiding action. And now, to me, the brake pressure is actually less of a factor, because in the wet compared to the dry, even if you're going at the exact same speed, you actually have to apply more brake pressure in the wet to get the same amount of deceleration, and so I think the PSI being higher is actually completely normal. However, given the drastic delta in speed when Piastri decelerated, and especially in those conditions, I definitely think Piastri warranted a penalty for making that mistake, because we do not want a Mugello 2020 situation in the wet. Having said that, I think that 10 seconds was a little bit excessive. I think 5 seconds would have been a lot more fairer, because I'm not sure that penalty actually matches the intent that Piastri had. In Spain, Max Verstappen got the same time penalty for purposefully crashing into George Russell, as opposed to Piastri, who erratically decelerated more than he should have. To me, looking at that incident, I just do not think that there was any intent from Piastri to catch Max out or to make the people behind him crash. I think he made a genuine braking error just too hard on the hanger straight in those conditions, because as the leader with a clear track ahead of him, I don't think he took into account how much harder it is for the people behind him to see and react in those conditions. Speaking of intent, when it comes to the Russell incident, however, I said this on Twitter at the time that there was definitely intent from Russell to try and catch Max out. Let's not forget that Max was only 1 penalty point away from getting a race ban at the time, and we all know after the post-qualifying interview that Russell was more than aware of this. In the footage, you can clearly see that Russell is looking to the right of his mirror multiple times prior to braking, and Red Bull even made this exact point in their protest after the race, that essentially George was trying to trip Max up into making a mistake and getting him a penalty point. You can call it gamesmanship, you can call it being cheeky, but to me, even if the speeds weren't as severe, there was definitely intent in the Russell incident with him trying to catch Max out, as opposed to the Piastri incident, which to me was just a genuine mistake. And now, whether or not Piastri would have gone on to win the race with a 5-second time penalty compared to a 10-second penalty is actually kind of irrelevant in my opinion, because you can make an argument both ways. It's impossible to judge how the race and more importantly the pit stop phase would have played out because the margins were so close. And there is also a psychological difference as well that we have to account for. With a 10-second penalty, Norris had a much bigger buffer and had no incentive to push too much, knowing that he would eventually take the race lead. Whilst with only a 5-second penalty, it changes the landscape entirely during that last phase of pit stops, because with Piastri being able to pit onto a fresh set of slicks and get them up to temperature quicker before Norris did his stop on the following lap, it makes the first outlap for Lando on those slick tyres a lot more unpredictable as to whether he would have been able to maintain the lead. That is the thing that we'll never know, and that is the thing that's impossible to predict. After the race, Lando was understandably ecstatic after winning his home Grand Prix and again making those inroads in the championship, whilst Oscar was visibly frustrated and basically chose not to answer any questions about the penalty. Ironically, one of the drivers that came to Piastri's defense after the race was actually Max, saying, "This isn't the first time that this has happened in front of me. I only heard after the race that he got 10 seconds for that. I think that's too extreme, but I don't make the rules." This is a mistake that I think, looking back at it, Oscar is just going to have to own. And now I still think that 10 seconds was excessive for what we actually saw, especially given the circumstances, the repercussions, and more importantly, the intent compared to some of the other penalties that we have seen so far this season. And I do think that 5 seconds would have been a lot more fair. I also think that had it been dry, I think he would have got away with it because Max would have been able to react to it a lot sooner, and his car would have also been able to brake a lot better as well. Overall, I think looking at the frustration on Oscar's face after the race and the effect that this has on closing the gap in the championship, it is yet another amazing chapter and another great race in what has been a great 2025 teammate battle for the title at McLaren. And with Lando now wrestling back some of that momentum, I cannot wait to see what happens next at Spa. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.